Every family has its dynamics and ours was no different. I was 29, working what my family considered a fake job in digital marketing, living in what they called a tiny apartment across town. My older brother Marcus had the corporate lawyer position they understood, the house in the suburbs they respected, and the wife who impressed them at gatherings. I had learned long ago to keep my financial situation private. When I started my digital agency 3 years earlier, the family dismissed it as playing on the computer. When clients started paying serious money for social media campaigns and website development, I never corrected their assumptions. When the business grew to 6 figures annually, then multiple 6 figures, I maintained the same humble demeanor that had protected me from their expectations my entire childhood. The Thursday before Thanksgiving, I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone rang. "Sarah, you're bringing dessert tomorrow," Mom announced without preamble. "And make sure it's store-bought. We don't want another disaster like your homemade attempt last year." "Of course," I replied, marking another payment in my financial tracking spreadsheet. The monthly transfer to account ending in 7834 had gone through successfully, just like it had for the past 36 months. "And dress appropriately," she continued. "Marcus is bringing his new client, and we want to make a good impression. Try not to mention that job of yours." That evening, I selected a simple black dress from my closet, nothing that would draw attention or questions about where I could afford such things. I had learned to dress down for family events, to maintain the image they had of me as their struggling youngest daughter who couldn't quite get her life together. The drive to their house in Maple Heights took 25 minutes from my downtown apartment. I had specifically chosen to live in the city, in a building they would consider sketchy, to maintain their perception that I was barely scraping by. The truth was, my loft was in one of the most expensive districts with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river, but they never visited to see it. I arrived at exactly 5:30, carrying a pumpkin pie from the bakery they preferred. The house looked immaculate as always. Mom had repainted the living room again, installed new hardwood floors in the dining room, and upgraded the kitchen appliances since my last visit. The renovations were beautiful and expensive. "There she is," Dad called out as I entered. "Our little entrepreneur." The word dripped with gentle mockery, the way he might describe a child's lemonade stand. Marcus stood by the fireplace, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, talking animatedly with a distinguished older man in an equally expensive outfit. "Sarah," Marcus called out. "Come meet Mr. Peterson. He's thinking about some marketing for his firm." Mr. Peterson extended his hand politely, though I could see the dismissal in his eyes when he took in my simple dress and understated appearance. "Nice to meet you. Marcus tells me you do some computer work." "Something like that," I replied with a smile. "Mostly small business websites." "Ah," he nodded, already losing interest. "Well, keep at it. Everyone needs a hobby." Marcus laughed and steered the conversation back to legal matters while I made my way to the kitchen, where Mom was orchestrating the final meal preparations with military precision. "Set the table for 8, she instructed. "And use the everyday dishes for yourself. Save the good china for the important guests." I complied without comment, arranging the mismatched place setting she had designated for me at the far end of the table, away from where the serious conversations would take place. My sister-in-law Jennifer arrived with their 2 children, immediately launching into a detailed account of their recent vacation to Europe and the private school interviews they had been conducting for 5-year-old Emma. "We're looking at Riverside Academy," she announced proudly. "The tuition is steep, but Marcus insists on the best education money can buy." "That's wonderful," I replied genuinely. "Emma's so bright. She'll thrive anywhere." "Well, not anywhere," Mom interjected pointedly. "Some of us understand the importance of investing in quality education instead of wasting money on frivolous things." The comment stung with its intended meaning. They still brought up my decision to attend State University instead of the private college they had preferred, as if my choice to graduate debt-free had been a personal failing rather than financial prudence. Dinner conversation flowed around me as it always did. Marcus discussed his latest high-profile case, Jennifer shared updates about their country club social calendar, and Mr. Peterson offered insights about the luxury car market. I contributed when directly asked but mostly listened, accustomed to being treated as the family member who had little of value to add to discussions about success and achievement. Sarah's been trying to make this internet thing work for years now, Dad explained to Mr. Peterson during the main course. We keep hoping she'll find something more stable. The gig economy is tough, Mr. Peterson replied sympathetically. My daughter went through a similar phase before she settled down with a real career. Exactly, Mom agreed, refilling his wine glass. We've tried to help her understand that playing around on computers isn't a sustainable lifestyle, but you know how young people are about facing reality. I cut another bite of turkey and nodded agreeably. You're probably right. As we moved to dessert, the conversation took a turn I hadn't anticipated. Mom had been drinking wine throughout the dinner, and her tongue had loosened considerably. You know what's really embarrassing? She announced to the table. Having a 29-year-old daughter who can't even afford her own rent. The table fell silent for a moment. Jennifer looked uncomfortable. Mr. Peterson studied his pie intently, and Marcus cleared his throat awkwardly. Mom, Marcus said quietly, maybe we don't need to. No, it's fine, Mom continued, waving her hand dismissively. Sarah knows we're just concerned about her future. Don't you, honey? I looked up from my plate, meeting her slightly unfocused gaze. Of course. I mean, look at this situation objectively, she pressed on. Here's Marcus supporting his family, buying a beautiful home, planning for his children's education. He contributes to this family, helps us with things when we need it. And then there's... She gestured vaguely in my direction. Dad picked up the thread. What your mother is trying to say is that we worry about your financial stability. You're living in that tiny apartment, driving that old car, working at this computer job that doesn't seem to provide any real security. We've offered to help you find something more stable, Mom added. Marcus could probably get you an entry-level position at his firm. Receptionist work, filing, something with benefits. That's very kind, I replied evenly. I appreciate the concern. Do you though? Mom's voice was rising slightly. Because honestly, Sarah, it's getting embarrassing. When people ask about my children, I can talk about Marcus's partnership track, his beautiful family, his success. But when they ask about you... She trailed off with a shrug. Mr. Peterson was now actively studying the pattern on his dessert plate, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Jennifer was cutting tiny bites of pie for the children, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The truth is, Dad said, leaning forward with the earnest expression he wore when delivering what he considered tough love, you need to stop pretending to be successful and start taking concrete steps toward an actual career. You're 29 years old, Mom continued. Most people your age have their lives figured out. They're not still playing around with hobby businesses and living like college students. Marcus finally intervened. Maybe we could discuss this later, privately? Why? Mom demanded. Sarah's not a child. She can handle an honest conversation about her situation. Can't you, honey? I set down my fork and looked directly at her. Absolutely. I appreciate your honesty. Good, she nodded approvingly. Because frankly, it's time you stopped pretending and acknowledged reality. You can't even afford your own rent without struggling. How embarrassing is that for the family? The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Around the table, everyone had gone very still, waiting to see how I would respond to what was essentially a public humiliation disguised as concern. I smiled calmly and reached for my water glass. You're absolutely right, Mom. I should definitely face reality. She looked surprised by my easy agreement, as if she had expected more pushback. Well, good. I'm glad you're finally ready to be realistic about your situation. Completely realistic, I confirmed. Dad nodded approvingly. That's what we like to hear. Now about Marcus's offer to help you find something at his firm. I listened politely as they outlined their plans for my career rehabilitation, nodding at appropriate intervals and making non-committal sounds of agreement. Mr. Peterson gradually rejoined the conversation once it moved away from the uncomfortable topic of my apparent failures. Jennifer began discussing holiday plans, and the tension at the table slowly dissipated. By the time I helped clear the dishes, the mood had shifted to something approaching normal. Mom seemed satisfied that she had finally gotten through to me about my unrealistic lifestyle. Dad appeared relieved that I was seeing sense about my situation. Even Marcus looked pleased that the family intervention had gone more smoothly than expected. I woke up Friday morning in my downtown loft, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. The space was minimally furnished but elegant, with polished concrete floors and exposed brick walls that had cost more to renovate than most people spent on cars. Over coffee, I opened my laptop and reviewed the previous month's business statements. Revenue was up 18% from the previous quarter, driven primarily by 3 new corporate contracts that would each pay more annually than Marcus made at his law firm. My investment portfolio had crossed another milestone, and the passive income streams were generating enough monthly to cover most people's yearly expenses. But this morning I wasn't focused on the success metrics. Instead, I was thinking about dignity, respect, and the difference between someone who has money and someone who understands money. I picked up my phone and dialed the familiar number. Wells Fargo customer service. This is Rebecca. How can I help you today? Hi Rebecca, this is Sarah Chin. I need to cancel a recurring transfer from my business account. Of course, Ms. Chin. Can you verify your account information for me? I provided the necessary details, navigating through the security questions with practiced ease. I see the transfer you're referring to, Rebecca said after a moment. The $4,800 monthly payment to account ending in 7834. This has been active for 36 months. May I ask the reason for the cancellation? The recipient no longer needs the assistance, I replied simply. Understood. I can process that cancellation immediately. The next scheduled transfer was set for December 1st, but that will now be cancelled. Is there anything else I can help you with today? That's everything, thank you. I hung up and sat back in my chair looking out at the city below. For 3 years I had been quietly covering my parents' mortgage payment. Ever since Dad's early retirement had reduced their fixed income and Mom's spending habits had remained unchanged. They had never asked for help directly, but I had noticed the stress in their conversations about money, the way they had stopped talking about certain expenses, the small economies they had started making. So I had simply started making the payments, routing them through an account that wouldn't be traced back to me, ensuring their financial stability while maintaining their pride. It had seemed like the kind thing to do at the time. 3 years of payments, $172,800, transferred quietly from my business account to their mortgage company, enabling them to keep the house they loved while believing they were managing on their own. 3 years of listening to them worry about my financial stability while I subsidized theirs. 3 years of being lectured about money management by people whose mortgage I was paying. My phone buzzed with a text message from my assistant. The Henderson Industries contract is finalized. First payment of $85,000 hits Monday. Also, TechFlow wants to discuss a 6-month retainer. Potential $200,000 total. I smiled and typed back, schedule the TechFlow call for Tuesday, and push back the Wilson meeting to next week. Then I made myself a second cup of coffee and settled in to work on the Morrison campaign, a project that would net more than my parents had paid for their house when they bought it 15 years ago. Around noon my phone started ringing. I ignored the first call when I saw Mom's name on the display, figuring she wanted to continue our conversation from the previous evening about my career prospects. The second call went to voicemail as well. By the third call I was curious enough to answer. Sarah. Mom's voice was higher than usual, with an edge of panic that immediately caught my attention. Thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you. What's wrong? I just got the strangest call from the mortgage company. They're saying our automatic payment was cancelled, but that's impossible because we never set up an automatic payment. Dad handles all the bills manually. I set down my coffee cup. That does sound strange. The woman on the phone kept insisting that someone from our household had called to cancel a monthly transfer, but Dad never set up any kind of transfer. We've always just mailed in the check every month. I said noncommittally. But here's the really weird part, Mom continued, her voice rising with confusion. She said the payment that was cancelled was for $4,800, which is exactly what our mortgage payment is. How would some random automatic payment be for the exact same amount? That is odd, I agreed. Dad is on hold with them right now trying to figure out what happened. They're saying the payment has been coming from some business account for the past 3 years, but that makes no sense. What business would randomly pay our mortgage? I could hear Dad's voice in the background, becoming increasingly agitated as he spoke with customer service. Sarah, this is really strange. The timing is so weird too, right after our conversation yesterday about financial responsibility. It's like some bizarre coincidence. Coincidences happen, I said mildly. But $4,800, Sarah. For 3 years. That's... I could almost hear her doing the math. That's over $170,000. What kind of business just randomly pays someone's mortgage for 3 years? Dad's voice in the background was growing louder. I caught fragments. No authorization. And, never requested. And, need to investigate this immediately. Mom, I said gently, maybe you should focus on figuring out what your mortgage situation actually is going forward. What do you mean? I mean, if someone was helping with your mortgage payments and now they're not, you'll need to make arrangements to cover that payment yourselves. There was a long pause. Sarah, do you know something about this? I know that mortgage payments don't make themselves, I replied. And if you've been getting help that you weren't aware of, you'll need to plan accordingly now that the help has stopped. Another pause, longer this time. In the background, Dad's voice had gone quiet. Sarah, Mom said slowly, this business account, you don't think it could have been? Could have been what? I mean, you work with business accounts, right? For your computer thing. I do work with various business accounts, yes. And you would know how to set up automatic payments? That's a pretty basic banking function, Mom. Most people know how to do that. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, processing the implications of what she was beginning to suspect. Sarah, she said very quietly, have you been paying our mortgage? Have I been paying your mortgage? Don't play word games with me. Have you been sending money to our mortgage company? I took a sip of coffee and looked out at the city skyline. Mom, you just told me that you can't even afford your own rent. How could I possibly be paying someone else's mortgage? She started then stopped. But Sarah, if you were, hypothetically if you had been. Mom, I said gently, I think you need to focus on what happens next, not what might have happened before. That afternoon my phone rang constantly. First Mom, then Dad, then Mom again. I let most of the calls go to voicemail, but I listened to each message. Sarah, we need to talk. The mortgage company confirmed that the payments were coming from a business called Chin Digital Solutions. That's your company, isn't it? Please call me back. Sarah, it's Dad. I've been looking at our bank statements and you're right, we never set up automatic payments. Someone else was making them for us. We need to understand what's been happening here. Honey, please call me back. I'm starting to understand what you meant yesterday about facing reality, and I think we need to have a very different conversation. By evening I finally answered when Mom called for the 7th time. Sarah, please, we need to talk. What would you like to discuss? You've been paying our mortgage, haven't you? For 3 years. Mom, you made it very clear yesterday that I can't even afford my own rent. How could I possibly be paying your mortgage? Sarah, please stop. I know it was you. Chin Digital Solutions is your company. The payments started right after Dad retired and we were worried about making ends meet. You somehow knew we were struggling and you just started paying for us. That would be quite generous of someone who can't afford her own rent. Sarah. Her voice was small now, very different from the confident tone she had used at dinner. I owe you an apology. For what? For everything I said yesterday. For every time I've made assumptions about your financial situation. For treating you like a failure when you've been taking care of us. I was quiet for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle. Mom, what's your mortgage payment going to be next month? $4,800, she said quietly. And do you and Dad have $4,800 to pay it? A longer pause. We're not sure. We'll have to look at our budget, maybe make some changes. What kind of changes? I don't know yet. Cut back on some expenses, maybe look into refinancing or... Her voice trailed off as the full reality began to hit her. Mom, I said gently, when you were lecturing me about financial responsibility yesterday, were you able to make your mortgage payment without help? No, she whispered. And when you were talking about how embarrassing it is to have a daughter who can't afford rent, were you paying your own bills? No. So when you told Mr. Peterson that I was the family member who couldn't contribute anything meaningful, what exactly were you contributing? Silence. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Why didn't you tell us? Tell you what? That while you were publicly humiliating me for being financially irresponsible, I was privately covering your financial irresponsibility. That's not. We weren't being irresponsible. Dad's retirement income is just lower than we expected, and with inflation. Mom, there's nothing wrong with needing financial help. But there's something very wrong with needing financial help while lecturing other people about financial responsibility. Over the next week, the reality of their situation became increasingly clear. Without the mysterious mortgage payment they had unknowingly been receiving, Mom and Dad were facing a monthly shortfall of nearly $5,000 when all their expenses were calculated. Dad called on Tuesday. "Sarah, we've been going through our finances with a fine-tooth comb. Without that mortgage payment, we can't make ends meet. What are your options?" "We're not sure yet. Maybe we could take out a home equity loan to cover the difference, or look into refinancing, but our income-to-debt ratio isn't great for getting approved." "What about cutting expenses?" "We're looking at that too. Mom's already talking about canceling some subscriptions and cutting back on groceries. But even with significant cuts, we're still short." "What about getting help from Marcus? He seems to be doing well financially." "Pause. We talked to him about it. He's willing to help some, but $4,800 a month is beyond what he can manage with his own mortgage and the kids' expenses." "I see. Sarah, I know we have no right to ask, especially after how we treated you, but is there any way you could continue helping us? Maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement, pay you back when we're in a better position." I was sitting in my office reviewing a contract proposal worth more than their house. "Dad, remember what Mom said yesterday? About how I can't even afford my own rent." "Sarah, please. We know we were wrong. We're sorry." "I know you're sorry. But being sorry doesn't change the fundamental problem." "What problem?" "The problem is that for 3 years, you've been receiving financial help that you didn't acknowledge, didn't appreciate, and didn't even recognize. And during that same time, you've been criticizing the person who was providing that help for being financially irresponsible. We didn't know it was you. But you knew someone was helping you, didn't you? The math had to work somehow. Your expenses were being covered by income that you didn't have." Another pause. We thought maybe Dad's pension was higher than we realized, or that we were just managing better than we expected." "Dad, did you really think you had somehow become better at managing money, or did you just not want to look too closely at how the numbers were working out?" Silence. "The truth is, Dad, you were happy to accept help as long as you didn't have to acknowledge where it was coming from or feel grateful for it. The moment you had to face the fact that your daughter was supporting you financially, it became a problem." Marcus called on Friday. "Sarah, we need to talk about Mom and Dad." "What about them?" "They're panicking about the mortgage situation. They've asked me to help, but honestly, I can't cover $4,800 a month on top of my own expenses. Jennifer and I ran the numbers, and it's just not feasible long term." "That sounds like a difficult position." "Sarah, I know what you did. I know you've been paying their mortgage for 3 years. Did they tell you that?" "They didn't have to. Chin Digital Solutions, the business account, the timing of when the payments started. It's obviously you. And what's your point?" "My point is that you're clearly in a position to help them and they desperately need help." I leaned back in my chair. "Marcus, at Thanksgiving dinner, what did you say when Mom was publicly humiliating me about my financial situation?" "I told her maybe we should discuss it privately. But you didn't correct her assumptions about my finances." "I didn't know about your finances. You knew I wasn't living like someone who was struggling to pay rent. You knew my apartment was in an expensive area. You knew I dressed well when I wanted to. You knew I was running a business that was clearly generating income. I guess I just thought. You thought what was convenient to think. Just like Mom and Dad thought what was convenient to think." "Sarah, that's not fair. What's not fair is sitting quietly while your parents publicly humiliate your sister for being financially irresponsible when she's been subsidizing their lifestyle for 3 years." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You're right. I should have spoken up." "Yes, you should have. But they really do need help now. And I really did need support at that dinner. But support is something you give to family members, not something you just take." "So what happens now?" "They lose the house." "Marcus, what happens now is that they face the same financial reality that every other adult faces. They need to make sure their expenses don't exceed their income." "But you could help them." "I could. But the question is whether help is something you give to people who respect you or something you give to people who don't." That weekend I made a decision. I drafted an email to my parents and Marcus. "Mom, Dad, and Marcus, I want to be clear about the situation going forward. For the past 3 years, I have been making your mortgage payments from my business account. This was not a loan. It was a gift, given out of love and respect for you as my parents. The total amount was $172,800. I stopped making these payments because on Thursday night, you made it clear that you view me as a financial burden and an embarrassment to the family. You specifically stated that I can't afford my own rent and that my lifestyle is unrealistic and unsustainable. I realize that continuing to financially support people who have such a low opinion of my financial capabilities would be inconsistent with your assessment of my situation. Going forward, you will need to make arrangements to cover your mortgage payments yourselves. If you need help understanding your options, I recommend speaking with a financial advisor or credit counselor. I wish you the best in resolving your financial situation. I read the email 3 times before sending it. It was professional, clear, and final. My phone started ringing 20 minutes after I hit send. I let it go to voicemail. Sarah, please, we can work this out. We understand now how wrong we were. Please call us back. The next call was from Marcus. Sarah, this is crazy. They're your parents. You can't just cut them off like this. The third call was Dad. Sarah, I'm begging you. We made a mistake. We're sorry. Please don't punish us for one bad evening. I turned off my phone and made myself dinner. Spring arrived early that year. From my office window, I could see the trees along the riverfront beginning to bud, promising another season of growth and renewal. The Henderson Industries campaign had exceeded all expectations, leading to 3 additional corporate contracts and a referral network that had essentially doubled my business. I had hired 2 full-time employees and moved to a larger office space in the same building. My parents had managed to keep their house, but just barely. They had refinanced at a higher interest rate, taken out a home equity loan, and made significant lifestyle changes. Mom had gotten a part-time job at a local boutique. Dad had started doing consulting work with his former company. Marcus was helping them with $500 a month, which was what he could realistically afford. We had spoken twice since Thanksgiving. Once in January when Mom called to tell me they had figured out their financial situation and didn't need my help anymore. Once in March when Dad called to say they were proud of me for building a successful business and that they hoped we could repair our relationship. Both conversations were polite and distant. They felt like the kind of conversations you have with acquaintances, not family members. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires a kind of investment in the relationship that I no longer felt capable of making. Instead, I felt something closer to indifference, which was somehow worse. The truth was, I had learned something about myself that I hadn't expected. I had always believed that love and support should be unconditional, that family meant being there for each other regardless of circumstances. But I discovered that respect was not optional for me. I could love people who didn't respect me, but I could not support them. On a Thursday in April, I got a call from Jennifer. It was unusual enough that I answered immediately. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling directly. Not at all. What's up? I wanted to thank you. For what? For what you taught our family about respect. I was quiet, waiting for her to continue. Marcus told me what really happened at Thanksgiving, about the mortgage payments, about everything you had been doing for his parents. And I realized that we had all been making the same mistake. What mistake? We were taking your kindness for weakness. Your generosity for inability. Your discretion for failure. Jennifer. No, let me finish. Emma asked me last week why Aunt Sarah doesn't come to family dinners anymore. And I realized I didn't have a good answer that didn't make us look terrible. I smiled despite myself. What did you tell her? I told her that sometimes adults make mistakes that hurt the people they love, and sometimes those mistakes have consequences that last longer than we expect them to. That's a good lesson for a 5-year-old. It's a good lesson for all of us. Sarah, Marcus and I would like to invite you to dinner sometime. Just us and the kids. No agenda, no family drama, just a chance to get to know each other better. I thought about it for a moment. I'd like that. Good. And Sarah? What you did, stopping the payments, making them face reality. It was the right thing to do. They needed to understand what they had lost. After we hung up, I sat in my office looking out at the city. Jennifer was right about one thing. There were lessons here for everyone. For my parents, the lesson was about gratitude, respect, and the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. For Marcus, the lesson was about standing up for family members who deserve support, even when it's uncomfortable. For me, the lesson was about boundaries, self-respect, and the difference between helping people and allowing people to take advantage of your help. But perhaps the most important lesson was this: financial support without emotional support is just a business transaction. And business transactions can be cancelled at any time. I picked up my phone and called Jennifer back. "How does Saturday evening sound for dinner?" "Perfect," she said. "I'll make Emma's favorite pasta." And Jennifer? Thank you for understanding. Thank you for teaching us. As I hung up, I realized that some relationships could be repaired, some boundaries could be redrawn, and some family dynamics could be changed. Not all of them, but some of them. And sometimes that was enough.